My family kicked me out homeless, then tried to steal the house I bought myself, but I fought back with undeniable proof. The night they told me to leave was colder than any winter storm could ever be. Standing in the dimly lit hallway of the only home I'd ever known, my mother's voice cut through the silence like shattered glass. "We can't keep supporting you anymore," she said, her words laced with a bitterness that made my heart ache. At 22, fresh out of college with nothing but dreams and determination, I thought my family would stand by me as I navigated the uncertain waters of adulthood. Instead, they handed me a suitcase and pointed toward the door. The streets became my new reality, each day blending into the next in a haze of uncertainty and fear. I learned to sleep with one eye open in shelters, to count every penny until it burned holes in my pocket, and to find warmth in places where none existed. Yet, amidst the despair, something remarkable began to take root within me, an unyielding resolve that refused to let circumstance define my future. Each rejection, each closed door, each cold night only fueled my determination to prove them wrong. It started with small victories, securing a minimum wage job at a local cafe, saving every spare cent, and eventually renting a tiny studio apartment. The walls were thin, the plumbing questionable, but it was mine, a sanctuary built from sheer willpower and countless sacrifices. Nights spent studying for additional certifications turned into better job opportunities, and slowly but surely, my financial situation began to improve. What once seemed impossible became achievable through relentless perseverance and unwavering faith in myself. 3 years after that fateful night, I stood before a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, keys in hand, heart swelling with pride. It wasn't much by conventional standards. The paint needed refreshing, the garden had seen better days, and the kitchen appliances dated back to the 1980s, but it represented everything I had fought for. Every late-night shift, every skipped meal, every moment of doubt transformed into brick and mortar. As I stepped across the threshold for the first time, tears streaming down my face, I knew this wasn't just a house, it was proof that I could overcome anything life threw my way. The transformation from homeless to homeowner wasn't just about acquiring property, it marked a fundamental shift in my existence. For the first time since being cast out, I felt truly safe. The mornings began with sunlight streaming through windows I could call my own, coffee brewing in a kitchen where I didn't have to worry about curfews or judgmental glances. Neighbors stopped by with warm smiles and homemade casseroles, welcoming me into a community that embraced rather than rejected. These simple gestures, so foreign during my years on the streets, filled me with a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Work became more than just a means to pay bills, it evolved into a source of genuine fulfillment. Promoted to assistant manager at the company where I'd started as an entry-level employee, I found joy in mentoring new staff members, sharing the lessons I'd learned about resilience and perseverance. My weekends transformed from survival mode to purposeful activity, volunteering at the same shelter where I'd once sought refuge, speaking at community centers about overcoming adversity, and even starting a small scholarship fund for young adults facing similar challenges. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, reinforced my belief that I'd built something meaningful from the ashes of rejection. Yet, beneath this newfound contentment, shadows of the past lingered. The wound of familial betrayal remained raw, though carefully concealed behind a facade of success. Late at night, when the house settled into silence, memories of that cold hallway would surface, accompanied by questions about why love had turned to abandonment. I told myself their opinions no longer mattered, that I'd proven my worth without their validation, but deep down, the desire for reconciliation persisted, battling against the knowledge of how they'd treated me. This internal conflict became the silent backdrop to my otherwise triumphant new life. The letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, its official-looking envelope bearing the family attorney's return address. As I opened it, my hands trembled not from excitement but from the weight of recognition. This was the handwriting of betrayal. The document inside demanded I vacate my home immediately, claiming my parents' rightful ownership based on a supposed verbal agreement made years ago. Their audacity took my breath away. They weren't just trying to reclaim what they believed was theirs, they were attempting to strip away my very foundation. The house represented far more than 4 walls and a roof. It symbolized my victory over homelessness, my ability to rebuild from nothing, and now they wanted to erase all evidence of my triumph. My initial shock quickly gave way to rising anger as I read through the legal jargon cloaked in family obligation. They claimed I'd promised to purchase the property in their name, using funds they alleged were originally theirs. The accusations grew more absurd with each paragraph. allegations of misappropriated inheritance money, manipulated bank accounts, and even suggestions that my entire journey from homelessness to home ownership had been orchestrated through deceit. What struck me most painfully was their absolute confidence in their position, the certainty with which they declared my achievements null and void. As I sat surrounded by papers documenting my painstaking journey, mortgage applications, bank statements, employment records, a profound realization washed over me. This wasn't merely about property rights or financial gain, it was an attempt to invalidate my entire narrative of survival and success. They sought to rewrite history, to claim that my accomplishments were somehow theirs to control. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar to them, it was a tangible representation of everything they tried to deny me, and now they wanted to possess it, to possess me once again. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after receiving the letter, I returned home from work to find my parents waiting on my doorstep, their presence as unwelcome as the November chill biting at my cheeks. They looked different somehow, older, wearier, yet still carrying that air of entitlement that had driven me out years ago. My father held a folder thick with documents, while my mother clutched her purse like a shield. Their eyes darted between me and the house, assessing, calculating, already mentally rearranging furniture that wasn't theirs. "You shouldn't have bought it without consulting us," my mother began, her tone somewhere between accusation and disappointment. "This neighborhood, these memories, they belong to our family." Her words hit like physical blows, each one designed to undermine my claim to the life I'd built. My father chimed in, his voice carrying that familiar edge of authority he'd always used to command obedience. "We never meant for you to be completely on your own forever. We just needed you to understand responsibility." Responsibility? The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. I remembered nights spent counting coins for bus fare, mornings waking up to security guards telling me to move along, evenings working double shifts while others enjoyed their carefree youth. This was their idea of teaching responsibility? My hands clenched into fists as I listened to their rehearsed explanations, their attempts to justify actions that had nearly destroyed me. They spoke of family bonds and shared legacies, but all I could see were the faces of people who had watched me struggle and done nothing, people who now wanted to profit from my pain. Their arguments grew more convoluted as they sensed my resistance. Claims of verbal agreements morphed into stories of financial support I'd supposedly received, tales of family meetings I'd never attended, promises I'd never made. With each fabrication, the truth became clearer. This wasn't about righting wrongs or reclaiming lost investments. It was about power, about maintaining control over someone who had dared to succeed independently. They couldn't accept that I'd built something beautiful from the wreckage they'd left behind, that I'd created a life they hadn't sanctioned or supervised. I watched them carefully, noting how their eyes avoided meeting mine directly, how their voices wavered when pressed for specific details. Behind their practiced words and calculated gestures lay the same insecurities that had driven them to cast me out in the first place: fear of losing control, of being shown up by their own daughter's resilience. The house wasn't just a building to them, it was a mirror reflecting their failures as parents, their inability to break the cycle of manipulation and control that had defined our family for generations. Instead of responding immediately, I invited them inside, my calm demeanor masking the storm brewing within. The living room, once a sanctuary of hard-won peace, now felt like a battlefield where truths would finally be laid bare. As they settled uncomfortably on my couch, surrounded by furniture I'd purchased with my own money, I began gathering evidence, not just of my ownership, but of everything they'd chosen to forget or ignore. Bank statements showed regular deposits for my salary, mortgage documents bore my signature alone, utility bills carried my name. Each piece of paper told a story they desperately wanted to rewrite. But the most powerful evidence wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the scars they couldn't see but I carried daily, the sleepless nights spent worrying about tomorrow's meals, the humiliation of job interviews while wearing clothes from donation bins, the loneliness of holidays spent in shelters while they celebrated family traditions without me. These invisible wounds served as testament to my journey, proof that I'd earned every inch of ground I'd gained without their help or approval. As I prepared to present my case, I realized the battle wasn't just about keeping a house. It was about claiming my right to exist independently, to define success on my own terms, and to build a future free from their toxic influence. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the room as I spread the documents across the dining table, a mosaic of my life's work meticulously arranged to tell a story that couldn't be denied. Each bank statement represented months of sacrifice, every pay stub documented hours spent proving my worth to a world that had initially dismissed me. The mortgage papers, with their official stamps and signatures, formed the cornerstone of my defense, Yet it was the personal records that held the most weight. Letters from former employers praising my dedication, photographs of me volunteering at the shelter where I'd once sought refuge, even thank-you notes from scholarship recipients. Each piece contributed to a narrative far richer than any legal document alone could convey. What my parents hadn't anticipated was my methodical approach to documentation. During those early years of struggle, I developed a habit of recording everything, not out of paranoia, but as a way to track my progress, to remind myself how far I'd come. Every receipt, every bill payment, every achievement had been carefully filed away, creating an archive of resilience that now stood as irrefutable evidence of my independence. When they mentioned supposed family meetings, I produced calendar entries showing I'd been working double shifts during those times. Their claims of financial support crumbled under the weight of my detailed budget records, showing every cent accounted for through my own earnings. The emotional proof was equally compelling. I shared stories of neighbors who had become family, of colleagues who had mentored me, of strangers who had offered kindness when my own blood had turned away. Their attempts to portray me as dependent on family generosity fell flat against testimonials from those who had witnessed my self-reliance firsthand. Even the house itself bore witness to my journey, the DIY renovations I'd completed myself, the garden I'd nurtured from barren soil, the community events I'd hosted that had transformed this space into more than just a residence. As I presented each piece of evidence, I watched their confidence waver. The carefully constructed narrative they'd brought with them began to unravel, thread by thread, until only the truth remained. This wasn't just about proving ownership of a house, it was about demonstrating the strength of character that had enabled me to build a life from nothing. Every document, every photograph, every memory served as a brick in the foundation of my argument, a foundation as solid as the house they sought to claim. The weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on my chest, each breath becoming more difficult as I faced the people who had shaped my earliest understanding of family. Their presence in my home felt like an invasion, not just of space but of everything I'd worked to create. Yet beneath the anger and hurt, another emotion stirred, pity. Not for myself, but for them. I saw now what I hadn't understood as a frightened young woman standing in that cold hallway years ago. Their actions stemmed from a deep-seated insecurity, a need to maintain control over narratives they couldn't comprehend. Their attempts to claim my house revealed more than greed, it exposed a fundamental misunderstanding of what home truly meant. To them, it was bricks and status, a trophy to be collected. To me, it represented safety, independence, and the culmination of years spent fighting for dignity. The contrast between our perspectives highlighted how differently we viewed the world. They saw possession as power, while I understood that true strength came from building something authentic and meaningful. As I watched them squirm under the weight of undeniable evidence, I realized that forgiveness would be my greatest challenge. Not because they deserved it, but because holding on to anger would give them continued power over my emotions. The journey from homelessness to home ownership had taught me many things, but perhaps the most valuable lesson was that revenge isn't found in winning battles, it's discovered in rising above them. Their actions had forced me to become stronger, more resilient, and more determined than I ever would have been otherwise. In a cruel twist of fate, their betrayal had given me the very thing they now sought to destroy, an unshakable sense of self-worth. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had kicked me out to teach me a lesson about responsibility, only to create a woman capable of thriving without them. Now, in their desperation to reclaim what they'd abandoned, they faced a daughter who understood the true meaning of accountability, not just for actions, but for consequences. As I prepared to present my final pieces of evidence, I recognized that this confrontation wasn't just about protecting my house, it was about claiming my right to define my own legacy, free from their toxic influence. The line between justice and vengeance blurred as I organized my final presentation. Each document, each testimony, each memory gathered weight beyond its original purpose. Justice demanded I protect what was rightfully mine, not just the house, but the narrative of my life. Vengeance whispered tempting promises of retribution, of watching them face the consequences of their actions. As I assembled the timeline of events, mapping out their attempts to manipulate both me and the law, I realized the complexity of my position. Every piece of evidence served dual purposes, to defend my home and to expose their hypocrisy. Their strategy became increasingly desperate as they grasped at straws, trying to find cracks in my armor. I watched them nitpick minor details, question legitimate transactions, and attempt to discredit witnesses who had nothing to gain but the truth. The more they pushed, the more apparent it became that their pursuit wasn't about reclaiming a house, it was about maintaining control over a story that had slipped from their grasp. Their version of events required me to remain the helpless daughter they'd cast out, not the successful woman who had built a life despite them. The legal implications extended beyond property rights. Their actions raised questions about elder manipulation, financial abuse, and the psychological impact of parental betrayal. As I compiled my evidence, I consulted with attorneys who recognized the deeper issues at play. The case wasn't simply about ownership, it touched upon fundamental questions of trust, family dynamics, and the boundaries between parental guidance and control. Each document added another layer to this complex web, creating a picture of systematic manipulation that went far beyond a simple property dispute. Yet, amidst the legal preparation, I grappled with personal implications that threatened to overwhelm me. The memories they sought to erase weren't just legal records, they were fragments of my soul. Every time they questioned my achievements, they reopened old wounds. Every attempt to discredit my journey felt like another rejection. The battle for my house had become a fight for my identity, for the right to claim my successes as my own without their interference. As I prepared to present my case, I realized that winning wasn't just about keeping a roof over my head, it was about preserving the person I'd become despite their best efforts to destroy me. The courtroom felt both vast and suffocating as I sat at the plaintiff's table, my evidence neatly organized before me. My parents, seated across the aisle, looked smaller than I remembered, deflated perhaps, by the weight of their own actions finally coming to light. The judge listened intently as I presented my case. Bank statements, mortgage documents, testimonies from neighbors and colleagues, even letters from former shelter staff who had witnessed my resilience during the darkest days. Each piece of evidence told a story they couldn't refute, the story of a woman who had built herself up from nothing. When it was their turn to speak, their arguments crumbled under scrutiny. Their claims of verbal agreements were baseless without proof, their accusations of financial support easily disproven by my meticulous records. By the time the judge delivered her ruling, there was no doubt left in the room. The house is unequivocally hers, she declared, her voice firm and final. She also added a stern warning about frivolous lawsuits, leaving my parents visibly shaken. Afterward, standing on the steps of the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't just vindication, it was closure. For years, I had carried the pain of being cast out, the fear that maybe they were right, that I wasn't enough. But now, surrounded by friends who had come to support me, I realized how far I'd come. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built something beautiful, not just the house but a life rooted in strength, independence, and love. That evening, back home on Maple Street, I opened my front door and stepped inside. The house felt different somehow, lighter, warmer. Maybe it was because it was truly mine now, free from any lingering shadow of doubt. As I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I smiled. This wasn't just a house, it was a testament to survival, to hope, and to the power of fighting for what you believe in. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel happy, not because I had won against them, but because I had won for me.